Hi all, thank you for being here. Actually quite more people than I expected, so thank you again. Today's topic, besides this sketch title, will actually be about something which started about maybe 2 years ago as a POC, but turned out as a milestone in my career and also in my colleagues who helped me building that. In short, as you can see, is an automation testing framework which is based on Node.js and with the nice little title Cuppet, which I know it bears similarities with a character, a cartoon character, but actually it's a combination from Cucumber and Puppeteer, which are the foundation of this tool or framework, depends how you view it. But let's first start with the, let's call it boring part, a few words about me. So I'm Miroslav Rusev. I've been in the IT industry as a whole more than 10 years. In the beginning, I started working as a computer hardware specialist, then I progressed as a network support level 2, and then I found out my passion, which is QA, turned out to be actually QA. I consider myself a tech nerd, so besides my job, I am also interested in a lot of stuff like photography gear, hi-fi gear, audio hi-fi gear, etc. Here I put a bit of a motto or something which I follow in my professional career is building robust and scalable automation testing tools. And I also been part of the amazing Drupal community since 2016. And this is actually my first year speaking. So, today's agenda. First, we are going to answer the most important question in my view, why? Because once you have an idea to do something, you need to ask yourself why you need to do it. Then we will progress in a simple comparison between the most popular frameworks, which most of you, I guess, already know, and how actually I get the idea to create Cuppet. Then I'll briefly show you what we achieved actually by implementing Cuppet and how we progressed in the company and what we actually improved based on our previous experience and previous tools which we are using. Then I'll show you really basic examples because we are limited by the time as the session is about 20 minutes. Then I'll share my GitHub repository and we'll move on to the question and answer session. So, about the why. In the beginning when we did the POC of either whether we need automation tool, a new one, because we are using Behat in combination with Pally and Diffie, etc., many tools as a general. We put ourselves the following 5 goals. First, we needed a unified behavior-driven QA platform that's easy to set up both locally and CI/CD. Why is that? First, Gherkin was a must because we already had a quite big QA team with various experience, so basically junior QAs, mid-level, seniors, etc. And we already agreed that Gherkin is a must because it's the easiest way to introduce new people, especially in the QA department, to start creating tests from scratch. And further, even for senior people, when the project is big, actually even enormous, it's easier to maintain Gherkin features instead of code, because with code it's harder to put restraints to people who commit and either they follow certain patterns or not, while in Gherkin it's more easier because it's just a natural language. And the other important thing was the single repository and Docker image, which is for me self-explanatory. It removes all the infrastructure overhead. The next point was being able to do multiple types of testing in single run. So what I mean by that is, in general, what we consider end-to-end for me was not actually end-to-end. Because, for example, in Drupal, when we are doing end-to-end, we are doing basically CRUD operations of, let's say, nodes, viewing pages, views, tables, whatever. But this for me is not actually full end-to-end because you also have visual, web performance, and mobile testing if you have mobile apps. And I had an idea, why is there no such tool in existence? And can we create something like that? And started thinking in the idea of developing it, how the developers are actually building our apps, instead of like we as a QAs use an external tool to test something and follow the guidance of the tool. Then another important thing was flexible and easily configurable. Back then I was part of FFW, now currently known as Jakawa, which is one of the biggest Drupal agencies. And we had like maybe between 5 or 10 projects in the pipeline every time, so multiple teams working in different projects, and we needed something for the company in general to be suitable for all kind of projects for various business purposes, etc. And the configurability and the flexibility were a must. Then this subject really important, the fourth point, is should not rely on community maintained plugins and connectors for industry standard tools. What I mean by that, I'm not opposed to open source, of course, because my project is open source. But for example, in Cypress and Playwright, I found out that many connectors to, let's say, White House or Pali or Gherkin were maintained not by the core maintainers of the tool, but from random people in GitHub and with, let's say, basic to none contribution to this repository, which for me was a big issue because previously in Behat we had so many problems of outdated certain plugins. Even the Mig extension in certain period, like a year or two ago, was outdated for a couple of months when PHP 8.2 was released. So I did not want to introduce such dependency in my new tool. And then the final goal, which is actually really specific for the company which I worked back then, is that reusable backbone structure and ready-to-go step definitions. So what I mean by that is I was inspired by the Mig context in Behat, and I wanted to create a predefined number of steps with already, let's say, ready-to-go test functions. So basically, open a page, create a cookie, log into backend system in Drupal, create a page, whatever. And currently, I have around 600 or 700 steps already created, which means that if you are starting, let's say, small to a medium-sized project, you can just install my tool and not have to write a single new function, only reuse the already created ones in Gherkin, which is something I think is not done yet in any other tool. So here is a sample table of comparing how our previous setup with multiple tools looked and how the unified approach is looking right now. So from the setup and onboarding perspective, we had multiple installations, multiple configurations and context switching between Pali, White House, Appium, DeFi, etc. Right now, this is a single installation because one repository, one Docker image, everything is as a whole, is a one package. Then from orchestration point of view, I already briefly mentioned that it's sometimes even impossible. I wrote here hard, but to be honest, it's really impossible to do context switching sessions, etc. Currently, there is absolutely no issue in my tool because it's only managed on level of features based on tags. I have a context switching for every scenario, which is either starting Appium or Chrome driver, or is making calls in the API via Axios, and you are actually not leaving the context of the tool or the current test execution, which basically means that you are not losing neither logs, artifacts, sessions, or whatever, because they persist in the memory or either in a JSON file. End-to-end in one run, again, something which I briefly mentioned. It's either split on different jobs pipelines or combination of that. Currently, like I said, everything is feature-based. Then from the CI/CD, Docker, and cloud perspective, in the multi-setup, you have many jobs, containers, hooks to start one another to transform data or something like that. Currently, it's in the same tool, so you don't have any infrastructure dependency. Version matching, again, self-explanatory. You need to maintain 5 or 6 different tools, repositories, or whatever. Currently, it's only one. And the last thing, which I, as a QA, put a lot of emphasis, is we no longer have fragmented outputs because the logs, artifacts, and reporting are in the same tool. And just briefly, if I can recap everything, the cons of standalone tool usage is that you have infrastructure and maintenance overhead, brittle orchestration, and it's harder to share sessions, data, environments. The only trade-off for Cuppet, for me, is the planning and the architecture. So basically, in the beginning, the QA lead or the tech lead of the project should really think how to set up the whole structure, how to tag the features, how to combine them, because if you are going to test all of that, you need to have a really nice plan, otherwise it's gonna be messy. So I'm introducing a human factor as a risk here, but I prefer that way than the technical factor. And yeah, lastly, I was gonna miss that binding different tools together that creates a layer of dependencies. What I mean by that is for every industry standard tool like Polypium, etc., I'm using their official JavaScript libraries, but as you know, they're constantly updating. So when you're updating certain tool, you might have deprecation of some functionalities, etc. So you need to have an abstraction layer, which I already created in the tool, but still sometimes it's not enough and I need to release major versions. So this is a possible failing point. So now a brief comparison of the web testing capabilities of already known and well-established Cypress, Playwright, and Puppeteer. If you look at the table briefly, you'll see that Playwright seems to be the obvious winner here, but I choose Puppeteer. Why is that? Because if you introduce Cucumber to Puppeteer, you are overcoming the two major issues of Puppeteer, that it doesn't have scalability. What I mean by that Puppeteer by default cannot run concurrently. But with Cucumber, it's not a problem. And also there is no test runner support by default in Puppeteer. Of course, there is another small issue, WebKit support. But our idea of this tool was not to do cross-browser testing. Cross-browser testing I prefer to be done in browser stack, Lambda test, or Chromatic, whatever, something different. Here I'm amplifying on the actual functional integration, regression, and end-to-end testing, not how some things look or render in a different browser. That's why WebKit was never part of the discussion. So there were other things besides the web testing capability. As I already mentioned, the full end-to-end was my biggest scope, biggest goal, or something which I tried to achieve. And other capabilities were far more important than the web capabilities. First place, the behavior-driven development. So out of the box solution came with Cucumber, because for example in Cypress and Playwright it's flaky, hackable. In Playwright not so much, but you need to wrap Playwright inside Cucumber and you are losing functionalities in Playwright, which is not okay, at least in my personal view. For visual testing, I'm relying on Backstop.js, which is for me industry standard open source tool or library for visual testing. It runs on Puppeteer by default, so the integration in my tool was, I think, not out of the blue. It was easy, but at least I didn't need to do some hackable stuff like in Cypress or Playwright. Because, for example, in Cypress you cannot use Backstop.js by default. You need to rely on third-party tools like Cuppet tools or Chromatic, which are of course very nice, but they're paid. And for Playwright, you have internal capabilities of doing visual testing, but they're very basic and you don't have a lot of control over it. Then web performance. Lighthouse again runs on Puppeteer, which made the integration pretty easy. Cypress has outdated plugin for Lighthouse, which is community supported, so basically 2 points a failure here. That's why I didn't choose Cypress, of course. Then Playwright requires a custom Lighthouse integration, which means there is nothing already created, you need to code it yourself. For accessibility, I'm using Poly. Again, works on Puppeteer in the backend. It does not use Puppeteer by default, but if you want to use it, it's there and it's supported by default. Cypress uses a community supported plugin again, and Playwright uses X core package, which is nice because it's an official support by the X engine, but it also has the support for Puppeteer and other frameworks. So here it's actually 50-50. On REST API, I did something which I felt I needed to do. I made a custom Axios abstraction, which allowed me to have full control and customization. Both Cypress and Playwright actually have their internal abstractions for REST API testing, which of course are really nice because they're supported by big by a lot of people in GitHub and a lot of contributors. But I wanted further control, and with Axios I get everything because it's the standard REST client. Just here is a spoiler. In future, I'm planning to add MQTT and WebSocket support for the tool, which I think will be first in those kind of tools to support the MQTT, not WebSockets, of course. For mobile testing, APO started to be a problematic actually integration. Then it was seamless because I found the issue which I had initially. Right now there is a context switching, like I mentioned. We're using the Cucumber hooks. It's based on the tagging of the features. I think this is also the only tool which supports that. Basically, in the other two, Cypress, Playwright, or WebDriver AIO even, you either have the capability to test web or mobile. My tool only needs tagging in the feature, and it's a single run. You're going to switch between mobile and web. So imagine the scenario: you have the website, the API, and the mobile app. You can test everything from start to the end in a single test, if you want, of course. And lastly, as a reporter, I'm relying on the Cucumber default reporter, which allows for a lot of customization. For Cypress, the best one is their cloud, but it's paid, which was problematic in the beginning. And Playwright requires a lure because their default reporter for me lacks a lot of features. So, in short, what we achieved when we switched our big hat stack and other tools which I already mentioned, we got our tests, I mean, for the same project, for the same number of scenarios, etc., 80% faster runtime with 60% less code, and we also allowed ourselves for extra room of additional integrations. And as a short list of improvements, you can see they are self-explanatory. We improved the structure, we allowed for better and more flexible configurations, CI/CD flexibility, etc. Okay. Here are the short examples. On the top left screen, you will see the standard verbose running mode of the tool. It uses the default Cucumber formatting with a bit of a change in the colors, but you can have fully customizable way of showing this. For example, this is the full verbose mode where you see every step which is passed and every which is failed. And at the end, you have a summary, a recap, basically. You can have a view where there are only green dots for passing step and red dots for failed, and in the end you'll get a summary only for the end steps, if you prefer less clutter in the CLI. And in the reporter, you have all of that, but with the addition of search, filtering by passed and failed. And if you see on the failed step, you have an attached screenshot. It's just clickable. If you click it, you will see the screenshot of the failed step, which I think is really nice, and it's really convenient instead of having the screenshots in a separate folder and looking by their name and the name of the step. This is the GitHub repository. If someone will want to scan it and start contributing, helping me with that, you will see basically two things. There is Cuppet and Cuppet core. Cuppet is more like a template, so you can start directly using it, create tests or whatever. Cuppet core is the backbone where all the pre-created steps, the functionality-wise, the integrations with Apple, White House, etc. So if you want to contribute, you need to contribute to Cuppet core. And you also will find big documentation. Of course, I'm open to feedback if you want me to improve it. Sorry, you are still scared. So you can contact me via email or in my LinkedIn profile. And now questions, if we have time, of course. Yeah.
So a question about why other QA engineers live without these functionalities that you missed during the comparison. So Playwright is very popular, it's million users, and nobody wants the same features that you want.
This is an interesting question, actually. In the beginning, I was asking myself the same thing: why not use something already created? But to be honest, I'm relying on Puppeteer, which is not less popular than Playwright, but not exactly in the QA Whereas Puppeteer is mainly used in Jest and some other tools, and I like the dev approach behind it. And also, I guess because most of QAs are not thinking as a developers in terms of automation. They're thinking like we need to have tools to achieve certain coverage of tests. But I'm thinking more like, can I develop something which will give me the whole part of testing instead of relying on different tools for everything. I just didn't like this dependency and context switching. I give an exact example which we had. Mobile app, completely detached from the web. Of course, there is API communication. How we will test that if you're updating content in your website, let's say Drupal, you will see it in your mobile phone in a single test. You need to rely on infrastructure, share screenshots, then compare them. It's absolutely flaky. Right now, it's an end-to-end experience. And for you, if you're not an experienced QA or with dev knowledge, it will seem to you like a normal web test. Because if you open the verbose mode or disable the headless part and you open Android Studio on your local and the website, you will see everything flashing on your screen and working seamlessly together.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, one stream also in our next section.
Okay. Should I?